Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is part 2 of the making of Truck Puncher. This is where I cover sound design. 4 weeks after the other guy. I'm really bad at this. Anyway, I talked about this in the arrangement elements a bit, but this song was an attempt at me to kind of get out of my wheelhouse when it comes to sound design. I was trying to use things and do stuff and do things in ways that kind of not necessarily that everyone else did, but that more people did than what I did. And I'll explain a little bit of that when we get to the specifics. But for the most part, I did kind of stick to sort of my usual stuff. And I do have the one massive patch. I have the two massive patch. How many massives do I have in here? Damn. So, in the beginning, we've got a bunch of drum loops. We got this thing. This is kind of the main deal of the whole song. This is the first thing I wrote, and these are all individual patterns. But then I merged them all, and then eventually they became this guy, which is the higher version of it. Now, here's something funny. This is my second recording of this video because I actually could not find the thing that was high-passing this sound. Because in the beginning of the song, everything's high-passed, and then it becomes less high-passed, and then that's the intro. And I'm looking at, this guy. I'm looking at this guy. There's a high-pass here, but, it moves. And it turns out I actually automated the built-in EQ in the mixer insert for reasons. And what's hilarious about the original recording is I had just got done saying that there's 90 ways to do any one thing inside FL Studio. And that's usually a good thing. In fact, most of the time it's a good thing because it means that different people with different workflows can do their same stuff in the way that they're most comfortable doing. It's just that it's been a while since I looked at this project and I forgot. So, yeah. Anyway, the sound itself is a harmonic. Oops, 29. Not even the right one. So the way that this works is that I have it in 29. It's not doing anything, but it's going to 20. And in here, this is where I have the distortion and the EQ that's just shaping things. But the reason why I do that is because I think I have another version of it later that I want with the same kind of mix effects. So I put that in there along with the other stuff. But we'll find out. We're gonna do some archaeology in this track. Anyway, this guy, this dude. That's the lead that I'm looking at right there. So that was what I just described. This is the real one. There we go. I knew it was different because I was looking at this waveform, and it wasn't the right one. I'm on a good roll. So speaking of what's going on up here, this is the harmonic phase randomness, which there's two modes. There's this way and this way. This way treats it like it's an actual single waveform totally. So everything is one voice, which means that that essentially means that all the harmonics are changed at random phase together. So that if it plays, this moment in phase and that moment, 30% phase or 120% phase, all the harmonics have that one phase change. And then this way is spectral change, where every individual harmonic has a different random phase, and that I like that the best. And it has a particular dirty feel to it, and the reason the dirtiness is a result of more interesting phase cancellation, which is also accomplished by the unison. But the reason why I could tell that this waveform is different is because in this one, you can see that there's actually a larger sine wave presence. And in this one, not so much. And that is directly a result of what I was doing in the local EQ window, where I have pumped up the lowest fundamental tone. You can see if I bring it down a bit, that's the effect it has. So that's why I knew it wasn't the same one. Speaking of which, this is the local EQ. I have pumped up the sine wave because reasons. I usually do that kind of stuff because it sounds good. I don't really ever have a particularly practical reason. Although I can say that the reason why this works is because what this does is that it forces the lower fundamental to be louder into the distortion, which creates different behavior against the harmonics that are present. And that's sort of like one of those things that you just kind of do intuitively, and then later you figure out why. And that's what I do. So there's that. And then on the unison, like I mentioned earlier, I'm automating it off. So I'm kind of plucking the unison. This is what this envelope is. And such. This is the harmonic usage pitch window, where this graph, if you're unfamiliar with Harmor, is it's this value per harmonic. So these harmonics up here have different unison values increasing over time, that kind of thing. And this is what I meant about a phase cancellation. Normally, unison in regular world, but not out of world, will change a waveform's pitch altogether, as one whole thing. And if you keep the line in the center line the whole time, then that's what that would be. But if you're doing this means that the higher harmonics actually have a different unison value. It's as if we actually did 512 frequency splits and had different units of values for all of these particular harmonics. Now, we're looking at this graph. You might not necessarily see like where the harmonics are supposed to be, but what these poles represent, the actual groups in here, are octaves of harmonics. So, like, these are all different octaves. This first octave actually doesn't. You can kind of see down here. This is the first. Is the fundamental tone, and then the first octave. So there's not actually anything in between here. This does nothing to anything because there's nothing there. Then over here, there's actually one harmonic in the middle, and over here, there's three, I think. Every octave has twice as many harmonics in it than the previous one. In fact, to the point where the last octave has as many harmonics in it as every octave behind it combined. And that's always going to be true whenever you add a new octave. If you want to add a new octave of harmonics, you need to double your harmonic content to do so. So that's a neat thing to keep in your brain when we're talking about harmonic stuff. And the pluck works. The pluck has a different shape. The pluck shape, you might notice what this does is that particular harmonics actually have a different decay time than other harmonics. And that's what this shape represents. You can kind of see the correlation there. What this graph represents is the decay time per harmonic. So lower harmonics decay less, higher harmonics decay faster. And the default, where it's just a straight line, kind of makes it look like a regular filter pluck. You could certainly actually use the filter pluck to do this, but not this crazy different harmonic thing. And this is just saying that these harmonics have a longer decay, these have shorter decay, and then that's what this graph shows us. And that's pretty cool. And then it's distorted inside Harmor, and then it's distorted lightly again in the mixer insert, and then it's EQ'd. And then I have this parameter automating to do the high passing, and then it goes out and gets sidechained, and that's this sound. The other sound here is this guy. Yeah. Good old dupe 4. I like my dupes. That's with all the reverb on. So, the basic idea about these sounds is that it's pitch automation. And in here you can see what pitch automation I've done. Let's turn the reverb off a second. It's kind of loud. Let's turn the whole thing down. So in here I've got unison. I don't think I'm doing anything special with the unison. Nope, just regular old unison. I have it on the uniform setting, which is a bit different from the classic and blurred settings. It has more in common with Hertz mode, but it is not quite the same as Hertz mode. It's a little more stable. I cannot precisely explain the difference, but I one day might. I have the detune set to 2. Now, what the detune does is that it spreads the harmonics away from the fundamentals. So here's detune 2. Here's detune 1. So you can kind of see the big difference there. As it so happens, this particular difference is also the difference between a saw wave, which is what detune 1 is, and a square wave, which is what detune 2 is. Like I said about the different ways of being able to do things. So if you wanted, square wave, saw wave, and then you can keep going farther. It's no longer a square wave, it's something else entirely. And of course, if you wanted to, you could also square wave, saw wave. There's a little bit of a difference between using the detune than is actually using this. This is a crossfader where it's actually turning off harmonics, and this is a detune where it's moving harmonics. So that means that the original harmonics that you were using, with the information that you put on them, with things like the unison, the pluck, that kind of thing, that information is still there. It's just that those harmonics are moving support somewhere else. Versus with the fader, where those harmonics are turning off. So some of the harmonics that you actually have information on are no longer there or being processed. So that's the difference between those particular two modes is switching between saw waves and square waves. Not a whole lot else going on in the sound except for the reverb, and I am automating this over time to have larger values so that, like, at the very end of here, like, it gets cloudy. Also got a high pass that starts up early and comes down and comes back up again, that kind of thing. So nice sort of morphing business going on, and nice background noise and all that kind of good stuff going on. And it's all kinds of good. I have these things. This is what passes for me using white noise. I'm not actually a huge fan of using actual white noise, although I effectively use white noise when I process certain other things. I just like it when it's not literal white noise. And this is a very personal opinion that might actually not be super relevant to anyone else, but I don't like it when I'm using white noise as like the high end frequency sort of cloudiness, which is what white noise gets you easily. That's not actually sourced from something in the song. If it's something completely, because sometimes you really hear the white noise on top of stuff, but I usually like it to be just hat reverb or like this reverb with the dupe and that kind of thing, and have that be where the white noise-ish sound comes from. So that's related to what the content in the track. And this is really just a philosophical thing, like, because it is essentially white noise, the way it's activated, the way that it ends up being used. But like I said, in this track, I was attempting to sort of get out of my wheelhouse, and so I used a sample that was just this clap and a white noise thing. I even reversed some of it, so I have swells and that kind of thing. As I'm just effectively using white noise. That's all there's to that. Now, I'm using the Leviathan. That's what this says, the LEV Impact White. I'm using Black Octopus Sound's just gigantic sample pack called Leviathan. This was actually pretty new when I made this track, the Leviathan pack. And the reason, like, I have this riser, I just used a riser from Leviathan. And it wasn't so much that I didn't want to make a riser, but I wanted to sort of get in the mindset of a producer that produces this kind of more popular angled house. And they usually do things a little bit more efficiently. And it's not so much that they do, like, the easiest things, but, like, they put the focus and they put the effort of their productions in different places than I do. And I'm usually on sound design and, you know, making a synth and doing everything myself. And they're usually more on, like, mixing and arranging and that kind of thing. And that's what this track was. I was trying to kind of keep it around in that idea. So I just used a freaking Riot sample. Because, honestly, it probably would have sounded like that anyway. Also, that's Phil, not something I made. A sample. There is a particular art to utilizing samples that you didn't make, and I mean this is obviously true for the entire genre of hip hop. But mostly what I mean by that is that if you're sticking to stuff like I normally do, of things that you only have are yours, or are just kick drums. Like I'm not necessarily put this on the kick drums, but like samples, like actual sort of phrases and rhythmic content, almost and melodic content, that kind of thing, is that it puts you in a mindset that you wouldn't have thought of yourself, just by the fact that you didn't make it. So it's a bit different, and the way you use it is a bit different, and that kind of thing. So when I originally made the song, that did kind of do the job of sort of changing my ideas of what it means to produce. All the rest of that. This guy is a higher frequency version of the original pluck in the intro. In fact, it's basically the same patch. I just kind of screwed around with it a little bit. I put it in another mixer insert. I did not do that. That's weird. Okay. Well, it's the same melody anyway. It's a bit higher pitched. I brought down the local EQ. I have this other side over here where it's kind of the square harmonized version of, and also higher than the other side to kind of just give it this leady sort of feel. And I did have studies for this track. Like, I talk about this a lot in the previous part where I was mentioning I was looking at other Monster Cat tracks, just looking at, you know, more popular housey tracks, that kind of thing. And mostly what I learned about that kind of stuff is that anything goes when it comes to leads. As long as it's a note, it probably sounds pretty good. There are more interesting leads, but for the most part, they can get broken down to being pretty simple things. So I tried really hard not to overthink doing this lead. And you might be thinking, well, God, this is pretty complicated for a lead. But I just slapped shit on. I did not think too hard about what was happening. I just kind of move stuff around, put the unison up pretty high, put the unison pretty high here, just do the super saw thing. And that kind of fluty sound is the square side where we're doing the detune, like we were talking about before. And a little bit of the harmonic unison changes going on in there. And some distortion, and then some EQ, possibly. Nope, no EQ. No EQ at all. And that's just the sound. It's just really not that deep. And little non sequitur. So, I had this, there's a thread on Reddit about a video that Martin Garrix did where he was, or actually someone else recorded, but that Martin Garrix was doing some kind of masterclass on a song. And, everybody was getting really mad in that thread. I mean, not just the regular Martin Garrix hate, but they were getting on the thread about the fact that he didn't show any of his sort of more technical sound design. and he didn't show the more technical mixing aspects. He just showed writing things, and that how, like, you know, what they wanted to know more nitty gritty things. And this is something that, like, I struggled with when I was a newer producer by trying to learn, I mean, more complicated stuff, like the noisy basses, whatever. But I had this idea in my head that, like, all the high-end producers, no matter what they were making, they knew everything about everything that they were doing. And I don't necessarily mean that Martin Garrix doesn't know what he's doing, but when people are talking about, like, the nitty-gritty, like, how do you take this to turn whatever it is to what he's doing, they're looking for something that's not there. What he was doing was not that complicated to begin with. He didn't use that much of complicated sound. He just put the stuff together, and that was basically the song. It was not that big a deal. I'm not even saying that's bad. I'm not decrying his abilities. I'm not decrying the genres. I'm just saying that, like, it's not, like, they're really trying to focus. They're trying to find the silver bullet that makes, you know, their stuff pro and why is he famous and that kind of thing. And it has nothing to do with the music. And it has nothing to do with his production quality either, because he just put the stuff together and it just worked together because the genre itself is enshrined in the idea that it's not that complicated. And that's also that's kind of what this song was. This song was me not complicating it. Me trying to just be like, look, I'll just do a thing, I'll do a sound, and it'll work. And, like, that might sound a bit lazy. That might sound a bit like, well, it's not, you're just putting stuff together. It doesn't matter what it is. But there's a little bit of procedural sort of randomness to this. The idea that because you definitely can overthink stuff. Like, if you're trying to be all, like, micromanaging, make every note has a purpose, every harmonic in place, every filter and effect are perfect, and that kind of thing. You could do that, honestly, but it's never going to be done, and you're never going to think it's good. You're never going to be on point. You're never going to like what you're doing. And chances are, if you do, the reasons why you like it are because you didn't expect whatever happened to happen. Kind of like using samples that aren't yours, that kind of thing. And that oftentimes, I mean, when you're a producer, you have this kind of greener grass thing going on where, like, you hear someone else's work and you're going, wow, it's so different from what I'm doing. It's so much better and more detailed. It has all these things that you notice because it's so very much not you. But I guarantee you, whoever made that track, listens to that track that they made and going, ugh, this is my style. This is me again. This is all the stuff I've been making. It's so dumb. And it's so easy for me to do. And they might even listen to your stuff and go, wow, that's really complicated and unique and cool. Just keep that in your head about complication, and also about trying to find complication in things that are not complicated. Yeah, so it's a bit of a little rant there. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the beginning here. Now the drop. So, kind of the hallmark of this song is the massive patch that is this bass. Explain that in a second, but before we do that, let's talk about some of the other sounds that are in here. So we have this guy. This was a specific chord stab with a tone that I was very much trying to get that was related to sort of the Monster Kitey kind of house versions. And again, with the complication, this isn't that deep. It's basically a supersaw. Here's the thing about supersaws. Before Harmer came around for me, the most overprocessed supersaws usually had layers and layers and layers, and all together and interacting and effects and changing and different synths and all that kind of stuff. And the whole reason why you do that is because you're trying to create unique high frequency phase cancellation. Because when you have a lot of different voices that are very close together but not perfect, they're going to phase cancel. Now, they're all doing different things in different ways. It has a different kind of phase cancellation profile. And what makes a supersaw is the phase cancellation. That's what it's all about. And the reason why I say this is before Harmer came around is because Harmer's whole purpose is the idea that you're individually manipulating harmonics and putting them in a position that creates extremely unique phase cancellation. Like with this idea of the harmonic use of pitch differences, and then the voicing, and then the harmonic randomness and the prism, and all of these things that put harmonics in the harmonizer, even put notes and harmonics in places that if you were to try to do with regular subtractive synths would require monolithic amounts of layering and processing and all these kinds of things. And it's like when you're trying to get in your mind in the process of making a supersaw, just keep in mind that's what you're going after. And then because if you never really knew why you wanted to layer, why it worked when you did, that's why. So yeah, but this was also something I was trying to more or less keep simple. So it's just supersaw, lots of phase difference, lots of randomness. The prism kind of scrunches up harmonics It's very light, but it just adds to the pitch uncertainty, which creates the phase cancellation, which creates that. There's no noise in this. I have no white noise. You might remember the discussion I had about white noise earlier. The idea that all that noise is not notes. It's not harmonic activity. And if you fuck up enough with the high frequency phase cancellation, you're going to get noise, which is harmonic pitch activity, that frequency activity that is not conducive to harmony. Anyway, the actual chord that I'm using, just a big ass minor chord with the 3 near the top. I have 1, 1, 5, 5, 3 kind of thing. And then the big reverb and accent in the highs and the mids. I didn't necessarily I'm high passing everything, but I'm not trying super hard to separate that kind of stuff in this track. But like the feel that I got out of this when I made it is that it kind of sounds like a orchestra stab, doesn't it? Like it sounds like one of those old school keyboard like orchestra stabs, and that's pretty neat. And that's just what it sounds like. That wasn't something that I was trying to get this tone, but like later I was kind of like, that sounds like orchestra stuff. That quality actually comes from sort of the ambient stuff, like the reverb type. I'm using Valhalla Room for reverb, but I probably could have done this with the Fruity Convolver or even just the regular reverb. It's not, again, don't look for something that's too complicated. Just, it's fine. And then I've got the lead guy. And this is, again, like, about the song trying to maintain sort of simplicity. This is your everyday super saw lead. You know, I have A and B on. They're both doing super saws, and the one's alt and the other, it's with the inverting phase and higher pitch, lower pitch, vibrato. It might sound like I'm glossing over this stuff, but I'm really not. Like, this is like all the stuff I'm just kind of throwing at you and being like, oh, just these things to do stuff. That's all there is to it. You might be thinking, well, yeah, you didn't mention this specific harmonic unison configuration. Literally, if I didn't do that, you wouldn't notice a difference. And like, it's all this stuff that adds together to create, the mess that I was describing. This is like halfway in between the saw and square. This is all the way over. This has got some prism. This has more prism. This is higher. This is lower. This has harmonizing. This doesn't. They both have different kinds of unison settings, all this kinds of stuff. And it's the differences when combined together. This is basically a little mini layer that I've created. I've also got mono engaged, but I have it engaged in the miscellaneous function over at the channel settings window. Not mono, porta. Have porta engaged, which means that it'll slide between notes, but I can actually still play a chord. Now, how I actually decided to land on this particular rhythm was that I have this, which is just that's just the part from the beginning. I had this going on, and I kind of cut up where the accents were, and I just kind of copied that and put it in the lead, and then I made some changes based on sort of what I wanted it to sound like, that kind of thing, just as I heard it. I went over entirely about how I arranged this in the first video and why I decided to write that, so I'll just currently leave that to there. Here's that dupe from earlier. So now let's talk about the massive bass. So this was vaguely inspired by, it's inspired by pretty much anyone that's ever used massive. But I was watching a virtual Riot stream, and like it never really occurred to me to just use Vocodex as just a straight up single effect. I'm not combining it. I'm not actually it's vocoding against itself. Essentially, is what's happening. And I never thought about that. So that was a cool idea. So what's going on here is that I've got modern talking and the acid going on, and this is what I really hate about Massive, is that like when you're describing like, oh, how did you make this sound? What is the sound? The principles are just like, I use these two wavetables and it sounded like the wavetables. Although it didn't really sound like this before Vocodex. So like it's not as if there was that much going on inside the Massive to begin with. I believe I have restart via gate engaged. I totally don't. Or do I? I do. This is important. And this is something that I hate a lot about third-party VSTs, is that just by default, there's phase randomness on every note. and I hate that. I just hate so much about a lot of old, like, outside third-party plugins. Damn. Anyway, I have the modulation oscillator on, but I don't know if I'm doing anything. I think it's an extremely small amount turned on. Oh, it's filter FM. I'm doing that very small amounts. Awesome. So this is actually a technique. This is a technique that I'm convinced that yeah, it's all the way on. Okay, so this is not, neither of these are doing anything, and this guy's all the way on. So this is a technique that I'm convinced that Joe Ford does for a particular almost amplitude modulation, not necessarily ring modulation, but amplitude modulation. And what's happening here is that the filter FM is just doing it this fast on the filter, but because I'm using a cutoff filter and it happens fast enough, it's basically half on, half off for the oscillation of each oscillation. And if you've ever seen any of my older Citrus videos where I do this with ring modulation, specific shapes, and that kind of thing, I've always wondered, because that's basically the effect. There are ways of doing that without that particular processing, but it's not straightforward or intuitive at all. But I was always curious about how that particular effect was achieved by people like Joe Ford, who self-professed used only massive. And my conclusion was that it was based on using filter FM. I could be totally wrong about that, because as it is blatantly obvious, I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to using massive. A lot about what the sound is has nothing to do with massive. I was really just trying to make a sound that was like stereotypical. I was trying to make like the stereotypical massive sound, and I utterly didn't do that. And you might see it up here. This is how to bass 80, HDB 80. That's because I did a how to bass on this sound. So if I'm not being specific enough about things, you could go to the how to bass 80, and it'll be there for you. Let's talk about the Vocodex. So if you have it set to 0, or just like dash, but it's mostly 0, this is basically saying that it's vocoding itself, which you might think has almost no impact on anything. But the thing is that the whole thing about Vocodex's business is that you have your carrier, and it's being filtered by these bands. And then Vocodex's entire purpose in life is to manipulate those bands. And so we can move them around. We can change the bandwidth. We can change pitch distribution. Do a lot. Change that a lot. We can change like per band positions and do this unison thing, which I'm automating. You can see I'm moving the pitch around, which is causing the bands to move around, which gives us this almost vowel-y formity kind of sound, despite the fact that the freaking intro, the beginning, the actual sound in this sound has almost none of that going for it. But it has the sharpness going for it as a result of the filter FM stuff. So that's what I needed to go into Vocodex, which I would normally have done with Citrus. And I really just found another way to do a sound that I normally do, just with something else. And there was almost no value in doing that. That's, on me. And then there's this FM bass, which, sound. Yeah, and this is another pretty common sound for me. It's just, we have, okay, hold on, I have no idea what the fuck is happening. Okay, so I have this sound, which is basically a higher harmonic, and it's being modulated by a lower harmonic, but I've got even on, and like, in fact, they all have even on. Why did I do that? Like, you can see how the waveform is kind of scrunched up top of there. It doesn't actually do anything to change pitch. But here's the thing: the reason why those particular modifiers exist is because when we're modulating it, the pitch matters because it matters about how fast it is. But these modifiers are all about just different ways of being able to move the pitch. And at the end of the day, and like the difference is, like, I just kind of threw these together, but this higher note up here is what's causing the talking thing happening. And you could go all the way back to how to bass 4 to find out about how I did that, or how to bass 50, or how to bass 100. I keep coming back to the basic FM stuff every once in a while, but how to bass 4 is where it all started, and like all the concepts about that are what made the sound. Which it sounds like, complicating things. This is me trying not to complicate things. I was sort of looking at it as being like, just do linear to straight together, and like not just put on even and TX waveforms, and And I'm not really doing a whole lot with that sound anyway. This is the kind of automation that causes that sharpness going on there. Yeah, so that's that sound. And I don't know if there's anything else happening in here. Well, there's the separate sub. I guess actually there is some kind of interesting thing to talk about the sub, about specifically how we go about subs. So my sub was essentially a low pass saw wave, and the reason why I do that is because I wanted to have the higher harmonic content of the low frequency, the low harmonics in the saw wave series. And usually people accomplish something similar like this by having a sine wave and saturating it. However, saturating a sine wave is what gets you square wave harmonics, which would be this, only this. That's what you get. You might notice this has, despite the fact that it's round and smooth, it's got lower, very low values, it has more teeth than that. And I wanted teeth, so that's what that was. This is actually one of the first songs that I ever did a separate sub for on purpose. And that's because I studied the things that I was trying to make the copy with, and they all had separate subs, really obvious, really loud separate subs. So that was sort of where I was going with that. See, this part, it sounds like another sound, but it's that same FM bass. I just played a high note and a low note. That's the massive sound. Why does it got... Wait, no, okay, that's still the FM sound. Jesus. So that's what caused that sound. It's just high notes, the flat automation, and I didn't do that on purpose. That was just me putting stuff down, so I thought it sounded cool. A huge portion about this sort of complex sound design is putting stuff down until you think it sounds good. To a certain degree, you do that enough times for a long enough period of time, eventually you'll be able to do stuff on purpose. Eventually you'll know the kind of stuff that you want to do. Like in this song, I kind of knew that, like, you know, the chords were going to be on like every hit, and then the variations that I would do on purpose became kind of procedural. I keep saying the term procedural. What procedural means is that it's created on its own. It's like almost like randomized content. Like if you ever played a roguelike video game, that's procedurally generated game content, which is to say that it was not explicitly designed. It was, however, the go button was hit with particular parameters in mind, and things were built within those parameters. That's what this kind of stuff is. Or just putting stuff down within particular parameters, and over time, your parameters for your style and your type of music that you're producing will get more and more refined, and you'll end up doing things that are more intentional, or at least more conducive to whatever it is that you want to do. But for the most part, you know, stuff like this, I wouldn't have thought to do that on purpose. Just stuff that happened, and I was like, that's a good idea, I'll keep it. Of course, now, you know, if for some reason I am remembering this and I think about that in context of writing a new song, I'll know to be like, oh, that one time I did this thing with the high note and the flat automation, whatever. Like, then I'll know because I've done it. But this is what experimentation is, that kind of thing. There's basically no new sounds. And like these things, that's just a high note. And this is the background side massive that's controlling the wavetables, and then this is the vocal decks pitching. And like if I didn't, it's just so weird how not like the sound it sounds like coming into Vocodex, which you might think it would be because it's its own carrier modulator. It's a little more sensible when you listen to a sound that has a carrier and a wildly different modulator that might sound a bit different, but Vocodex as a processor could make the same sound process itself and still sound very different, which is particularly cool. So that was a cool thing to come out of watching Virtual Riot do stuff. And so the fact that I don't have like 30 more sounds pushed into here, or like a lot of post-processing and weird audio clips that are stretched and whatever, is because, again, this song was about reining it in for me. So that's what's going on. And then, of course, there's this part. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. The most obvious one on top is that bell lead, but we're going to do the ARP first anyway. This cool ARP is actually one of my oldest preset patches that I made with Harmor. I made this back in like Resolve, and I kind of brought this in because I just needed an ARP, and this is a pretty good ARP. Not a lot going on here. It's basically a supersaw, but it's a little more reined in. Like, I think I might have... I have this prism profile and then a little bit of prism, but it's honestly not doing a lot. Unison pitch, so it's doing this. Prism mount. Oh, unison index mapping. Okay, so this is doing a little bit of something. So, unison index mapping is cool. So when you have unison, right now I have 8 voices. What unison is that it's playing the same note, but with multiple voices. So as if we didn't use any unison, we could have actually created this exact effect if I had made 8 instances of Harmor with all the same stuff, except some of them play different pitches and different phases and that kind of thing, and different panning. That's what unison does. Unison index mapping internally means that in every single version of these different Harmors happening, we can actually set different parameter values of all the parameters. For example, Prism, I have this value set over here, and what this is saying is that it goes from, this is the value that it's set at, whatever value it's set at, this is just that value. And then this is the negative version of that value, which is to say the other side of the center off position. And then, of course, there's a center off position. So there's 8 voices, and they're all slowly shifting between these different versions of Prism. So that means that there's actually a different Prism value for every single voice. And this does wonders for creating well-balanced stereo images. And I might have actually done it with this. No, I don't. I have not. I sometimes do. This is because when you're doing pitch and phase as your only separators in stereo, if you're not, I mean, you can do okay with it, but chances are it's going to lean one way or the other. But if you use different effects, because remember what the Prism does is that it moves the harmonics around in special weird ways. So remember this idea about the high frequency phase cancellation, the weirder and the more different. But also, I mean, it's got to be different, but it's got to be related. This is why when we record guitars, you multi-track them, 1 hard left, 1 hard right. Sometimes you do 4, but for the most part, you do left and right hard. And the reason why you can do that is because even if you play the exact same thing, in the exact same tuning, everything is perfectly about the guitar, all the weird, subtle differences of the physical fact that you're playing it, you pluck it differently, and the strings vibrate in a different way and whatever. Despite how similar it is, there's vast differences, which means that it gives you this perfectly even stereo image. And rarely do multi-track guitars, and if you do it identical, the same sound, just evenly distributed, you can make it sound perfectly centered, perfectly balanced stereo feel. Perfection. And so Unison tries to sort of replicate that. And, like, you know, same thing with actual human voices. The idea that, like, if a chorus plugin is replicating, you know, one person, one line, and a whole bunch of people singing it together, and that also would have a perfect stereo field because of the differences, all the differences of humans singing the same thing more than one time. And so that's kind of what we're trying to replicate when the idea when we use unison index mapping to have other parameters other than pitch and phase and whatever have different unison values for each unison voice. That's what that was. It's got a harmonizer. I might have actually used the real filter. I don't know if I did that or not. Yes, that's what this is. So I have a filter. I have this, and I have this, but I don't believe that's the same plugin. No, so that's probably the lead. That's got the filter. Something else has got the filter. That might be this thing. There's totally notes in here that are like offbeat. And that's in the finished track. But you can't tell. Thank you, based sidechaining. So that was the ARP, and then I had that spacier lead. I think it's this guy. So what did I do to make that ramp? That must have been the not the volume. Might just be because of the reverb. Yeah, it's because of that. So, you got a pretty deep reverb going on, so that's why it sounds pulsy as opposed to solid. And this song I didn't almost no effort on. It's 3-voice unison, nothing else, not even distortion. It's just a saw wave essentially. I have the randomized phase, which does do a pretty fair amount to changing the sound. Like to demonstrate the versatility of this, like saw wave with randomized phase, especially under distortion. Super different. Like that's the point of that kind of thing. So that's why I like using it a lot. And then this guy. Muted. There it is. This guy uses shimmer, which is that sort of pitchy swell. It's the feedback, the shifting feedback that comes on here. In this case, I'm actually going low. I'm going down as opposed to up. That's why I went down. I'm just gonna keep going for a while. EQ with some boosted highs and delay to make it delay. I love working with high frequency stuff, which might seem a bit counterintuitive given my focus on bass, but it's mostly because high frequency stuff doesn't really require a lot of mixing or maintenance. You just kind of throw it on there and that's the end of it. And there's this guy. This is a sub drop. I believe this is the actual sub. Yeah, I could have done this with automation and not pitch, notes, but it's kind of fun to do like that. And the reason why I did this is because in the beginning there was no sub until the drop, but now there's sub here, and it felt weird during the rise to just suddenly not have sub, so I need to have some kind of sub in there. And then everything else in the song is still, sound design wise, is still just through all the sounds that we discussed prior. It's just that in the second drop I actually integrate the new stuff. Oh, look, another Leviathan rise. And Leviathan crashes, and this is the other impact but reverse, that kind of thing. Did I have that? I had that in this guy too. I just missed it. I consider that kind of stuff almost like the effects class of sounds to be sort of like a percussive thing. I file that under drums, which we'll talk about in the next part when we discuss mixing and mastering, which is honestly the biggest part about this track. The sound design wasn't that deep. And the arrangement wasn't that deep either. That was the whole point. But the mixing and mastering was a bit of a different approach for me. I integrated a lot about what I learned about this track into other tracks. It's in the future, the idea of the separate sub, that kind of thing. That's a big one. But also kind of how the kick sits. And because if you compare this to sort of like bass antics, while being old and I didn't really know what I was doing, I really wouldn't change a lot about it. Like it's more or less what I wanted it to sound like. And that's because I was comparing myself at the time to things like Feed Me and Maddie and that kind of stuff. This sort of like this kind of house electro, it's still electro. It's still got like a complex full of basses and whatever, but it's a little closer to more minimal genres of house when it comes to how the kick sits and how there's the snare and that kind of thing. And the space, the idea of space. We'll talk about that in the mixing and mastering part. If I'm not an idiot, this will come out tomorrow. If you have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.